Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our conversation about the government shutdown, immigration and public policy, President Trump, Schumer, Pelosi. We're going to talk about all of this. Now, I am here with Alex Bennett, who runs the Government Gurus podcast. Y'all want to make sure to check this out. And I'm going to go ahead and tweet, I've mentioned him on Twitter a few times, I believe at the Gov Gurus on Twitter. Definitely want to give him a follow and check out his podcast if you are taking AP US government and politics. Alex, tell us a little bit about yourself and your podcast and the purpose for it and what that has to offer students who are taking AP government this year.
All right. Well, thanks, Tom, for having me on. I want to say congratulations to Clemson. Even though they beat Notre Dame, I was happy to see that Alabama got trashed too. So I was like, yeah, Notre Dame didn't see that bad. Well, as Tom said, my name is Alex Bennett. I'm a AP government dual enrollment government teacher in Loudoun County, Virginia. I decided to have a podcast dealing with the new curriculum that AP government the College Board has given us. And I thought, some of my students have difficulty accessing material because of where they live. And I thought, how can they take government with them? And I thought a podcast that is, 30 minutes, a little bit longer, depending on the subject matter, that they could interact with that and listen to it and, get a better understanding of the material if they can't access their textbook, because their textbook in our county is online. And, we live in a rural part of the state where not everybody accesses it. So I've been doing that since June of 17. And, some guests that are coming up. I've talked to Professor Garrett Epps. Looks like he's coming on the podcast. Mary Beth Tinker from Tinker versus Des Moines. She is going to come onto the podcast. And so I'm really trying to get more and more college professors and academics. And then I'm going to do a podcast coming up with one of my students based on a paper they had to do on hate speech and whether or not it should be protected by the Constitution. So thanks for having me.
All right. Well, glad to have you, Alex. And I think that, remember, the Government Gurus. And also, Alex, where can people find your podcast? I know my podcast, and I have a podcast as well, people. So make sure you subscribe to that. I'm on iTunes, Spotify, and Google Play.
Same here. Spotify, Google Play, and the iTunes store, and you can access there. I'm not sure if I'm on Stitcher, but okay.
I find that Spotify is very popular. Yeah. And what I like about Alex's podcast, now my podcast just is about random stuff. Like I'm going to put this on the podcast. So if you're listening on the podcast, welcome. But also, Alex's podcast, The Government Gurus, is pretty much an AP government review podcast. So you can be driving home from school and, hey, I want to learn about, for example, if you want to learn about Brutus #1, that's the one where I was on there. Alex had me on his podcast a while back, and I'm very appreciative on that. And so as far as that goes, we wanted to talk about the shutdown. And Alex, what's going on with this shutdown, just in case, because a lot of times students are, they're busy with their lives. They don't know exactly what's going on. And I think the biggest thing, as somebody who's taught AP government a few times, the biggest thing to passing the AP government exam is to be engaged and to find teachable moments. Like if you're following politics, then all of a sudden when you learn about these concepts, you start to connect things. Okay. So following what's going on is very critical. So Alex, tell us what's going on with the shutdown. What exactly has happened with the government?
Okay, so when people hear government shutdown, they think it's everything is shut down, and it's really not. It's like a partial shutdown. So about 25% of what they're called non-essential employees don't show up. Now, they have essential employees like military, some people in the FBI, CIA, military, all of that. They're essential, but they go to work and they don't get paid. So you might have seen some news stories about TSA agents calling in sick. Well, they're supposed to go to work, but they're not getting paid for it. But the government shutdown essentially comes from the border wall, right? That was the big thing President Trump or candidate Trump at the time had campaigned on. And Democrats have, over the past couple of years have tried to work with him on are we going to get a wall for funding? They've offered him more money in return for DACA, which is deferred action of, deferred arrival in children, like giving them a pathway to citizenship. That appeared last year, and it did not work. This year, the president had asked for $5 billion. Democrats have said no. They've offered as high, I think, as $2.6 billion. For border security, which, Nancy Pelosi or Speaker Pelosi and Chuck Schumer talked about, but that's not a wall. So how did we really get here? Well, Congress is in charge of the budget, right? However, they don't really have a budget. They just pass these continuing resolutions. It's basically a statement that says, hey, we're going to fund the government on whatever we decided the funding was last time. So they basically kick the can. So every few months they said, yeah, we're going to get to it. Yeah, we're going to get to it. Well, they kicked the can from December 7th to December 21st and said, hey, the budget shutdown, we're going to get this done, right? We're going to talk about this and then we're going to go home. Republicans in the Senate passed a bill, said, hey, we're going to fund basically all parts of the government except for DHS, Department of Homeland Security. And we want to talk about, we're going to kick the border wall funding to February, right? They pass it. Well, the House decided we're going to pass a bill that says, no, we're going to give them all the money, $5 billion. Well, that's a non-starter because Senate rules require 60 senators to vote for the budget reconciliation. They don't have that. And so the government shut down on the 21st. Now, Democrats have passed the bill. The Senate passed before Christmas, and now the Senate is deciding not to take that up. And we are at a really interesting dilemma because the president has said he's not going to open up the government for weeks or months. And it doesn't appear the Democrats are at all going to back down and say, we're going to give him the $5 billion. So this is where we stand today.
And all right. And Alex, so, and then, of course, the next thing is the blame game. If any of y'all are watching, I've currently got a poll on Twitter at Tom Ritchie. And, of course, you can follow Alex at the Gov Gurus. And I've got a poll on Twitter because one of the things about a government shutdown is it's very political in nature. Now, of course, before this one, typically, like when you go back to the 90s with Newt Gingrich and Bill Clinton, it was like, it's their fault. It's their fault. But Trump, before this thing even happened, said, hey, I'm doing this. And so right now, only 34 people have voted. I just posted this poll. 47% say that it's Trump's fault. 18% say congressional Democrats, and 35% say both. Now, that's interesting. Now, that's another thing with polls that is useful if you're taking AP government is it matters how you ask the question. Now, notice the way that I framed this question. I gave people the option to say both. And so you see about a third of people are saying both. When they have to pick, it seems to be going to Trump. Now, of course, I would have to frame the poll differently there. It's just like when people ask about Confederate monuments. If you ask Americans, should Confederate monuments be destroyed or taken down, the majority of Americans would say no. But then if you frame it and you say, should they be moved to a museum or another place of respect, then that changes the poll significantly. And so the framing of a poll matters. So when you're studying polling, make sure, it's all in how the question is asked.
Yes.
And so anything else on polling, Alex, that you'd like to add?
Random sample, and you got to get a random sample, and you got to get enough usually about mathematically about 1,100 to 1,300 people in all different backgrounds. But the wording of the question, I think you got to get like you've got to make sure it's unbiased, and it matters because border security, if you poll like, do Americans want border security? And more overwhelming would say yes, but do they want a wall? They would say, that number shrinks. So yes, wording of the question is very important, but it's got to be a random sample, unbiased. And those are some of the main characteristics for polling. And but it can shift. It can shift very quickly.
Yeah, and Alex, that's one thing that I wanted to focus on again, which my Twitter polls aren't exactly scientific because, I'm just polling my Twitter followers, they're self-selecting. But at the same time, it's a good way to kind of take the temperature. It's almost like a straw poll, where it's just, it's so it's unofficial, but it's still kind of good to see what my Twitter followers are thinking, and to see that when it's like when it comes down to it, people, if they have to pick, they might blame the president, but a lot of times people will blame the political class in total. Now, Alex, what I want, and you brought something up that I've been thinking about here, okay, because, and I've never been shy with people. It's like people who know me know that I'm right of center. And so when it comes down to it, I think about the idea of party image. And that's something that you and I agree on, Alex. When Americans are asked, do you want a secure border? An overwhelming majority of Americans say we want a secure border. Now, then the wall, that doesn't get a majority. And I think the big gamble here, which I find interesting is, and Alex, I'd like to hear your opinion on this. Because it seems to me on this issue that President Trump, although he's got an extreme position on the issue, he, like the majority of Americans, agree with him in principle. Whereas, the Democrats, it seems like the position that they're taking, of course, that's the other thing I think about party image is the Democrats say, well, we favor border security. We favor border security. But what proposal have they put forward? Like, I think I heard you just say that the Democrats have said, oh, we won't give you $5 billion for the wall, but we'll give you $2 billion for this. And my thought would be that if they really cared about border security, it'd be something like, well, we're not going to give you $5 billion for the wall, but we'll give you $10 billion for this, if they were really serious about it. So to me, even though Trump's position is a little bit to the right of where most Americans are, that, the Democrats, and I think I'm wondering after tonight's address, like I thought Nancy Pelosi was just terrible on camera. And it came off to me. Now, of course, that's my perspective that these people aren't really serious about the problem. Like the president's talking about people getting raped and killed and all of that kind of stuff. And then they get on there and talk about this as a manufactured problem, which seemed to me a little bit insensitive. What was your thought on that, Alex?
Well, I mean, so we know that illegal immigrants have committed crimes, but I think some of the rhetoric that the president used, the heart, children that they're being taken up by mules, and there are problems like if women are coming up and if they're being raped. So we know that when people come up here, that on the way that there is a problem. But most people coming up, I think 87%. I think it was Yuma. I was listening today from the New York Times that it was 87% are families. So we have to recognize, if you're a Democrat, that there are crimes, right? Illegal immigrants have committed crimes. So I guess it's the point of, well, how does the president, introduce that, right? Is he using it to a political advantage? Are these things that are major problems, like the humanitarian, like, oh, we don't have enough beds or this, and we're trying to get them away. Like the humanitarian crisis where Democrats are going to push back on would be like if you're separating the families, right, at the border. And so that would say, well, that is manufactured. It's not manufactured. I think we know marijuana is coming through, but how much of these crimes are happening, and is one, you're gonna, if you go to a family member, like the person from the officer that was killed in California, are you going to tell him, well, not all illegal immigrants are like that, it was just this one? Okay, well, what about the girl who was killed, Molly Tibbetts in Iowa, where the family doesn't want that to be political, right? Like, we're not blaming. So you see, it's a very problematic issue, right? Because we know that there are issues at the border, but do they, how can we prevent them? And Pelosi, Speaker Pelosi's response was, they really focused on the government shutdown, because, not to say that they're not thinking about the families, but they think they can figure out, like, they're going to try to put the squeeze back on the president, right? They're going to say government shutdown because you're going to start getting paychecks not showing up, people not showing up to work. You're going to start to feel a pinch here, and they're going to try to use that to make President Trump bend. But I think now what you've seen, that they are so dug in on their positions that, I mean, imagine if President Trump comes out and says, you know what, I'm not going to get the money for the wall. Okay, we're done, right? I mean, that is going to be a detrimental hit to his re-election, right? Well, what about Pelosi and Schumer? They're going to come back and say, man, we're going to give you the $5 billion. I mean, the political clout they would have, bless you, the political clout that they would have would be, I mean, it would be in the toilet. So both of them are really stuck. Now, that's why you saw what is President Trump going to go around and say, this is going to be a national emergency and kind of bypass Congress. So, he could save face. The Democrats could save, face when it comes to the Republic. I mean, I don't personally like responses. You and I talked about them just before. I think we know that we know Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer are going to come out and say, you know what, we don't support this and the government shutdown. So I don't know if anybody tonight, if there was any winners or losers tonight. You can take a poll and see how people feel, but when it comes down to it, is the wall something? I mean, can we open the government up and then just focus on the next 30 days, 60 days to get funding for whatever border security that they want? I mean, because there's already a fence up. There's already a barrier in different spots that President Obama, that Schumer, that Clinton had voted for, the Secure Fence Act. So there are parts that we have a wall up, right? So is that any different than a concrete wall-to-wall image? And Democrats at the time would say, yeah, it's just like, well, these are just little spots. This is not a massive, like, hey, we're stopping everybody from coming in, right? People seeking asylum, families and things like that. They would argue this is just to prevent the smuggling, where Democrats would argue with President Trump, that you are just trying to get rid of everybody. You don't care about asylum seekers. You don't care about families. You don't care about this. And this is why we don't want that wall. Right.
Well, and I guess what's going to be interesting here is what resonated more with that 20% of Americans that actually elects people to Congress and that creates congressional majorities and elects presidents and that sort of thing. And so it looks like Mr. Huskin has joined us. Let me go ahead and let's see. Yeah. I need to, I've muted, but I need to, let's see. Are you able to unmute yourself, Mr. Huskin? I'm not sure. It's like, I think, okay, you try to unmute yourself again.
How's that?
Okay, excellent. Okay. And Mr. Huskin's here. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Well, hi, everybody. My name is Mr. Huskin. I teach government economics in E-Town, Pennsylvania, Elizabethtown, Pennsylvania. So kind of bringing another perspective to the conversation here. Two ideas that I wanted to throw out there, just kind of for you guys to kind of chew on, as well as the folks kind of following along. We really didn't get from either side a whole lot of new information. They kind of just were repeating the same claims they've repeated since the campaign. And you guys started talking a little bit about this idea of who's the speech really meant for? Is it really meant to try to convince anybody new to join the conversation? Mm-hmm. One of the things that I had heard on some of the commentary, particularly from NBC, as they were kind of coming back between the speeches, was this discussion of trying to reassure congressional Republicans that the president still kind of has their back, and the speech was kind of meant to sort of reassure them in any way. Did you guys get any of that feeling? Because I didn't feel like that was reassuring to anybody, either speech.
Yeah. Now one thing, I guess it's like definitely the things President Trump said today, none of them were things that he hadn't said already. Yeah. But then again, I wonder, are these the things, because this is the first time, Teddy Roosevelt called this the bully pulpit, that the president has this ability to command attention and to say that I'm going to address the nation. Now, what's shocking to me is that President Trump, with his experience in television and all of that, this is the first time. It's almost halfway through his term, and this is the first time that he's chosen to address to use this primetime format. Now, one thing I would say is he doesn't seem to be in his element just speaking to a camera. It's like when I make YouTube videos, that's one thing I had to learn. It's like you have to speak into the camera and speak to it like it's a person. And this wasn't like, when you look at Ronald Reagan, Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, Barack Obama, they all knew how to it was that FDR fireside chat vibe, which, President Trump seemed kind of out of his element. But of course, then you go to the Pelosi Schumer, and that was weird. Like I was talking to Alex before this started, and it was like that time where Donald Trump, then candidate Trump, had Chris Christie standing behind him, and SNL had a thing with, it was just weird looking. And I just didn't think that, and it seemed to me like now Pelosi was using all these humanitarian arguments, which seemed to kind of cater to the Democratic base. Now, when President Trump used humanitarian arguments, I was like, he's just trying to throw that in there. This is not what it's about from his perspective. It's kind of seemed a little disingenuous. It's like Australia. They basically, found ways to, they say anytime we catch a boat on the way in, we're bringing it back because we're trying to protect people. And that they just don't want these refugees coming into the country. But then Nancy Pelosi's talking about the humanitarian crisis after President Trump's been talking about people getting raped and killed. I thought it was a bit tone deaf. And then Schumer, I thought, was a lot more impressive once he started speaking. His lazy eye, like before he spoke, his lazy eyes like this. Once he starts speaking, his eyes both open. It's an interesting kind of phenomenon, but he seemed a lot more credible to me as far as he's talking to like the average American. But at the same time, it was almost like this hostage taker thing, like open the government, then we talk. Like I'm thinking about the end of Dude, Where's My Car? If y'all see, where it's like, give us the continuum transfunctioner, then, we'll give you your girlfriends. And then we won't go into that. But as far as that goes, it's like, it seemed to me that when Schumer's like, let's reopen the government first, it's like, well, what are we going to do? Are we going to go back to not doing anything about this problem? And that's really what I'm concerned about, is like, Mr. Huskin, did you like coming out of this, what is the argument that Democrats have? And serious question like this, what is the argument that Democrats have that they actually are trying to do something about border security? Like that's what I'm missing after that. Like I really don't see, as someone who is right of center, I mean, I don't see where the Democrats projected any kind of seriousness about this issue.
The only point that I can say, and being someone who kind of considers himself more in the middle of the political spectrum, there's some areas where I could go to the right. There's some areas I could go to the left on. I kind of looked at it as the only one that I felt really had a lot of credence behind it was when Senator Schumer was talking about this idea of average Americans being affected directly by the shutdown. It's interesting. In talking with some of my government students today, I had a number of students bringing up how, as we enter week 3, they're starting to finally see the effects on their families of some of the little things of the shutdown. Like I had one student who mentioned a sibling who had gotten married and they're trying to purchase their first home, and the federal loan that they are planning on using to purchase that home is being held up because there's no one there to process the paperwork because of the shutdown. Another person mentioning how their grandparents go to a VA hospital, and the VA hospital is scaling back some of their services because of the shutdown. So that was kind of the one area that I felt had, at least from my perspective, a little bit of resonance. I don't know if it necessarily is going to get lost in sort of the other stuff going on. I completely agree with what you said about the president with kind of throwing in humanitarian stuff as just kind of an icing on the cake, little bit of thing to try to make him look a little more moderate. I just, most of his speech didn't really ring as moderate. It was just kind of the same points we've heard since he was on the campaign trail. To a certain extent, I would agree with you with the Democratic leaders as well. I thought Schumer performed better than Pelosi. Yeah. I'm one of those people that kind of would like to see some fresh blood with the Democrats anyway. I would like to see some younger faces, some just different personalities in there. It seems like forever I've seen like Schumer and Pelosi. I want to see what else is out there in the party.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'd piggyback. I didn't see what President Trump was going to offer anything different. Like this is anything different than what he's been saying. And the Democrats responded. I think I'm not sure if Chuck, Senator Schumer, because he's the minority leader, that came off more like, hey, he's like, work through the disagreements, reopen the government, let's split this up, which is not, they were playing right to that crowd where the people are out of work, and that's where they hammered on, because people are going to care first about their paycheck rather than a wall. And I think that's where the Democrats are going to have the higher ground. Remember last year at this time we were talking about the government shutdown and getting DACA. Remember the Democrats said, yeah, we'll pass this if you give us a chance to debate and get through DACA. And I don't think it's anything different. But yeah, to see President Trump in the Oval Office, like speaking to the camera, much different. I don't think he came off as effective as he can be. I think I talked to my students about, he knows how to play a crowd. He knows how to get the pulse of the American people. He knew exactly what to do in the campaign to rev up the crowds and rev up people behind him. And there's an excitement, but way different element in the Oval Office. And maybe he was coached that way because, hey, this is the Oval Office. This is serious, right? But, when you're coming there, you got it. I mean, I was waiting for his national emergency powers, or for him to say, this is what I'm going to do from the Oval Office. And again, like I said, seeing it was awkward just having Speaker Pelosi there, and then Senator Schumer just sitting there waiting, and then here's Senator Schumer. So it was just like the optics of both. What we saw was, I don't think, very beneficial to either party. But
so from what I'm hearing from you, Alex, is like nobody really hit a home run tonight.
No, I mean, I don't think so. I think it's gonna. I mean, I don't know if you need people to come on TV and say, "Hey, people are suffering. Open up the government. We're not getting paid." I think a lot of people know that. So I just don't think. After an election, Speaker Pelosi coming out there, I just don't know if there was anything gained from it, right? Because we've said it, they're all the similar talking points, right? And so it's no different than them, at least they weren't shouting at each other on camera, but it's a typical response. And I mean, I don't know what other Democrats felt, but I listened to Trump's speech. I was like, that was it? Because you and I were talking, hey, do you think 10 o'clock's going to be okay? And then I found out, I said a tweet. Acosta sent the tweet. It's only 8 minutes. I'm like, what? It's only an 8-minute speech? She said, oh. And then, the Democrats came out, and I was like, okay, well, I don't know what was politically gained for either party here tonight.
Yeah, and I'm now, of course, you do have the gravitas of the Oval Office, but I think you and I can both agree, President Trump didn't really maximize that. And there are still the issues like with his microphone. Like I could hear him, and I'm going to apologize to my audience. Like it's pretty evident that I'm under the weather. But since Alex is here with me, I figured other people are talking too. So when you see me sneezing, my eyes watering, or coughing, more of that. Alex blessed me earlier. It was a cough, but I still appreciate the gesture. But the thing is that sometimes I could hear that, and it was just like, why can't they get his microphone right? I mean, he's the president of the United States. So that seemed to me a bit underwhelming, even though I think that he did a good job showing the seriousness of the issue. And so I guess from my perspective, it's like Schumer's like, oh, all these people are, out of work. Let's get the government running. And President Trump had already said, like, I'll take $5 billion. Like he went down from $20 billion to $5 billion. I mean, I'm almost waiting for him to. I mean, we're getting into President Trump's personal fortune territory here, where we're talking about an amount of money where, where there are people that actually have, the individuals that have this amount of money. And so it's not really that big of an amount of money. So I'm just wondering why not. So as far as that goes, we'll see. I mean, I'm interested to see. Now, one thing, I did put another poll up on Twitter, ladies and gentlemen, at Tom Ritchie. And what I'm asking on Twitter is, I want to kind of get a feel for what people, because I think that President Trump's end game was to, in his view, expose the Democrats for not being serious about border security and not really caring about it. But yeah. I'm kind of curious where, that will go as far as the public perception. And that goes back to that idea of party image. Like, do people view the Democratic Party as being like in the American mainstream on this issue? Is Trump too extreme on this issue, or is he closer there? I'm going to be interested, because I'm sure scientific polls are going to come out in the, in the coming days. Now we've got, now, Alex, Aiden and his friends are saying that they're watching. You've got some actual students watching.
Oh, I do?
Yeah, so I think so Aiden said to tell you that he's watching. Now, also, if any of Mr. Picone's students are watching, Peter, you can unmute yourself and introduce yourself here.
Tom, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Good to see you. We hadn't talked, we've emailed, we hadn't talked face-to-face. Good to see you, Peter.
Nice to meet you. I'm just back from a basketball game. I didn't get to hear the speech tonight.
Okay.
Well, it was pretty quick.
I did, of course, on the way up, listen to the breakdown of it on the radio and whatever I could get off the internet in the last few minutes. Yeah.
Yeah. The breakdown is going to be an 8-minute speech and probably an 8-minute rebuttal. And then they're going to be talking about it for the rest of the night.
For hours. Now, Peter, one thing we haven't talked about, that I might throw to you here. What is, because Alex, you mentioned there's an 8-minute speech, an 8-minute rebuttal, and now it's time for the media to take that and to just throw it into hours upon hours of cable news. Peter, what role does the media stand to play in how this shutdown is going to play out?
Well, before we go to that, I want to go back to what I heard you say when I logged on, if you don't mind.
Oh, go right ahead.
I heard you say you were wondering what Trump's end game was, and that was whether it was to expose the Democrats on this issue. Boy, I don't even, I just really took sort of exception with that. I mean, what is his end game? It's to build a damn wall. That's the end game. I don't think it was to, I mean, I think the Democrats are all for border security. I think the issue is wall or no wall in his mind. You don't see it that way?
Well, now I could see, I do think that when it comes down to it, like when you ask people, and I think one of the reasons that President Trump got elected, in a very close election, is he was able to speak to, average people in a way that they could understand, make America great again, build a wall. One thing that I would ask people sometimes, I would ask, if Hillary Clinton gets elected president, what is she going to do? And blank stare. People didn't know. Like, she hadn't really communicated that. Now, if you ask about Trump, what's he going to do? Build a wall. And so, yeah, I mean, I could see that, as far as that goes, Peter, that if this wall is not built, or I think in Trump's view, it's not so much that it's built as it's perceived to have been built. So he's talking about, oh, we've got this steel barrier now, and it's not going to be concrete, but it's still going to be a wall. Right. But yeah, so I do think in terms of, you could very well say that there is some tunnel vision here on Trump's part, because the issue is really about the wall more than anything else. Now, I guess the question I would ask, though, is, you hear over and over again that, Democrats support border security. What is it that the Democrats are proposing that, that's what I'm missing here. It's like, it's obvious what Trump wants, not as obvious to me what the Democrats are willing to do in order to tackle the problem of illegal immigration.
Whoa. Well, let's talk about that for a second. What makes you think? What makes you think that that's what they want? In other words, we have a golden moment here, Tom. We have a moment in history where a grand bargain could be struck. In other words, where the Democrats could say to the Republicans and to Trump, look, we'll give you the wall, because we know there's always going to be a door through it. There will never be the kind of wall you envision. Economic necessity in America dictates cheap labor, and for that reason alone, there will be doors through that wall. But we'll give you your wall. We'll give you your $4.55 billion. But in return, you give us something that you don't want to give us that will move this country forward. Now, imagine if that kind of deal got struck. Imagine if that's what Schumer and Pelosi are going for. And it's not going to be DACA because the two aren't equal. So it has to be grander than that.
Well, what DACA is, I think, pretty powerful, but I don't know if there's anything.
They're not equal.
No, for a wall for 5 point. I mean, talking. They've got Obamacare on there, which is still surviving. So
they don't. So the Democrats don't need Obamacare.
So you would either look at, you would look at either universal, education,
possibly
college free tuition, maybe. But I mean, then you're going to start eating into the budget. I mean, I think that it would, even said, I think it's a generic thing with border security. I think they're going to go for technology, whatever that encompasses. You're going to go with border security agents for training, like all this technology down there that allows the border patrol to, technology assist them. I think that's where they're going. As for, President Trump had called for judges. I would think that the Democrats would throw that in there, but I don't know if people are going to care, like, judges this and that. I don't know if that would be part of the funding, but at least
that would be a problem for Democrats on the basis of trust alone, because it's not something that can be written into a bill. They'd have to trust that he comes through. So any promise for the future that doesn't get written down with the wall funding is not going to be something Democrats will go for. It has to be something that when they put this forward, we're talking grand compromise, it has to be something they can put down in writing and the president signs off on at the very same time that he signs off on the 5 bill for the wall. Then we could move forward on something.
Yeah, but
that's interesting. It sounds like if the three of us could solve this shutdown, that we could do this.
Well, let me throw an idea out there, Tom.
Yeah. Well, I mean, go ahead.
So look, there's no way that he wants to turn his back on coal, and there's no way the Democrats want to turn their back on this particular issue. So what if he agrees to a massive alternative funding bill, which in essence does turn its back on coal in return for his wall? Do you support him on that?
Whoa, now that is that's going to be an interesting So you're saying that if they want to strike some kind of grand bargain, it's going to need to be bigger and maybe reaching into some other sectors. Now the thing is, if Trump took this deal, I think politically, if he throws these West Virginia coal miners under the bus, I mean, West Virginia is the only state, I believe, that every county in West Virginia voted for Trump. It's like, you saw where Joe Manchin ended up realizing, like, you know what, I'm going to need to vote for Kavanaugh because Trump's so popular in this state. So I don't think politically that Trump could do something like that. But now, this is where we get into polarization. I mean, I feel like there are some of these things that would be very, very easy that the Democrats could throw something, could demand something of Trump, but then again, with the polarized atmosphere that the Democratic base, I wonder that if Nancy Pelosi, I mean, we're dealing with, what was it in November? There were those people that were doing that sit-in in Nancy Pelosi's office, and Ocasio-Cortez went in there and egged them on. So, she's already got like the extreme wing of her party promise, they're going to be out for blood if there's any wall money given. So I think on one hand, I think you're absolutely right, Peter, that Trump's got tunnel vision on this wall. Like if we figured out like something is more effective than the wall, and here's what we can do, then Trump would say, we've got to do the wall. We've got to build a wall, beautiful wall, And then the thing is, since Trump wants the wall so much, that there's a wing of the Democratic Party that's just not going to, the base of the Democratic Party, if there's anything that is perceived as a compromise on the wall, they won't accept it. So
I think the progressives would get would be, I think DACA would be it, but Trump cannot afford his base. That 35% is, and Ann Coulter was the one, on Fox that grilled him about it. And, there's nothing right now he can do for a compromise to Democrats that doesn't blow up that base. I mean, you said to yourself, if he starts moving away from coal, that's take a big hit. That's going to put Pennsylvania back in play. That's going to put maybe Ohio. He might, at least Pennsylvania is now back in play for Democrats. And I don't know if West Virginia used to be Democratic before, the 2000 election, but I don't know if he loses all of that. But he can't, I don't think, move away to green policies. I don't think he can get DACA because I still think that is too alienating for his base. So I don't think right now politically he doesn't have anywhere to turn. He's got to try to float this wall. And if he can't get it done, I mean, his base, that 35%, I mean, they're going to love that he's going to shut that government down and not fight for that wall. And if you put Pelosi on TV, they're going to see that and be like, oh, she's the witch that's, preventing all of this, coming to fruition. And I think Trump is cornered. I think he what other way out now if he can't get that border funding into the national emergency where he can scoop up funding from the Department of Defense, and that has more than enough money. I think they said $10 billion this year. That's not construction money. That's not spent. He can grab that money, but right now, I don't know how much longer he can hold out. Where the American people are going to just, I mean, this 3 weeks, I mean, couple days, it's going to be the longest ever. I mean, something has to give. Something's got to give.
Now, let me ask you this. Alex, you seemed, and Peter, I think you might have made a similar comment, but I know, Alex, you're talking about DACA being something that's very controversial, and I'm sure that there are people that are just rabidly against it. I mean, I'm a Republican. I don't have a problem with it. I mean, now for $5 billion. No. Okay. But if there were something that the Democrats are willing to come to the table and say, here is everything you're asking for about the border, and in return, we want DACA. But I haven't seen any indication that the Democrats are willing to do that. I mean, I don't think that DACA is as anathema to Republicans perhaps as Democrats may think it is, or as well as to Democrats.
Remember, they tried last year, and I think they offered him up to $20 billion, and he balked at it. I mean, it's interesting because he had the Republican Congress all year, and like I said, budget reconciliation. You need that 60 votes in the Senate, and I mean, he's stuck. In McConnell, they're stuck. So how can you give a nugget to moderate Democrats in the Senate, because they're not as progressive as Cortez. And, if Pelosi, very good tactically, she's never brought a bill forward that hasn't been successful. I think she's the only speaker to do that, but she's got a progressive wing. But what can she pull some Republicans over, because she can't get that progressive bill forward. And I don't think there's enough. I don't know. I mean, the Republicans did have passed it in the House for the $5 billion, but the Senate it's just a no-go. They don't have it. They don't have the votes there. So I just don't see how where a path we're forward. Like, there's just nothing. If DACA, the Democrats want it, he doesn't want to give that up. It's too costly for him politically to go out and say immigrants are the problem. They're the low wages. They're the ones that have been problematic, and now they're going to come here illegally with their children, their anchor babies, and then they are going to get a pathway to citizenship, which, again, we're talking about hardcore conservatives that are going to, where his bases like the Ann Coulters and stuff are not going to respond well to that. I mean, he's under the illusion that he won a major presidential victory, and he didn't. He won 3 states with 80,000 votes. That is not a massive victory where he can roll into it in the second for his second term.
Yeah. Now, Peter, do you see any kind of compromise possibly coming out of this?
Well, let me just back up here. So, you're talking to California here, right? Southern California. And a number of my friends are pretty high up in alternative energy, clean tech. And so this is just nothing more than a hope that came from dinners over the holiday that of course, these people are hoping something like this could happen because it would mean a rebirth for them. They have been, in essence, put on ice since the Trump election out here. So that's where that came from. Do I see any other real compromise? No, I don't. I would like to see that happen. I'd like to see some grand bargain be struck so the country can move forward. We can say our institutions work and so on. But but it just doesn't seem like the time that we're living in, or the inclination of the people on all sides. It seems like it's going to be a winner take all kind of proposition, doesn't it?
Well, and that's another thing. Like Mr. Huskin cut out because of his feed earlier, but he messaged me that his question was any of this really about the shutdown tonight, or is this just more posturing for 2020? It's like, do both parties have a stake in not solving the problem? Like, I mean, that's one thing we look at our current situation. Like, is there I mean, what does either party gain by coming to a deal and saying, hey, we work together and we solve this?
The trashing of our national parks, I think, though, is an interesting issue that's come to the fore. We managed to get into Yosemite just before the park shut down, and I did not see evidence of that trashing. I did see a lot of people there. I knew that was going to be happening within a very short period of time. But you can only imagine what will happen to those parks if this thing continues for a while.
Yeah, because from what it looked like, I mean, my friend was at a state park, but state parks, a lot of them operate with some federal funds, and it's like the park is still opened, but a lot of the facilities, such as the restroom. So it's like you can still go into the park, but the restrooms aren't open, and nobody, and it's understaffed. So I think that could be a very real problem. So the shutdown, you figure it has to end sometime, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I mean, but he goes on TV and he says that, hey, I'm gonna shut it down for weeks or months or years. He wears it like a badge, and I mean, I really don't. His persona, and I mean, where he's come from, and the businesses that he's owned, I really don't think. I mean, he's criticized, the government's full of liberals, but I mean, you got 75% open. I mean, I just don't see him. I mean, imagine him just saying no. I mean, President Trump coming back and saying, I'm going to give up on this. I mean, it's not in his character. I mean, there's just no room. And I think the only thing he's going to do after a while is I think he's going to declare national emergency and scoop up that money and then go from there. I think that is one of his only alternatives because.
Okay. And Alex, that's what, let's go into that because I think that's definitely something that would be a teachable moment for AP government students, something we need to look at. The powers of the president. Now, first of all, President Trump is claiming that, I mean, I saw a tweet, I haven't investigated this, a lot, but he said that, even the Democratic chair of whatever committee said, technically the president does have the power to declare a state of emergency. How much power? So first of all, how much power does he have? And second of all, is this going to be good politically? Like, I mean, if the president just says, you know what, we're going to stop the shutdown. We need to put people back to work, just like Chuck Schumer said. But I'm going to go ahead and take this border security thing into my own hands and declare a state of emergency. How does that operate? First of all, with his power, Alex, and then Peter. How would this go over politically? You think? So, Alex, what about that? We're going to get to my friend Brandon in a little bit.
So. Yeah, there's no question that the president has national emergency power, which is offered to him within the Constitution. So, for example, like Lincoln or Congress can suspend habeas corpus in times of rebellion or invasion, and President Trump has called legal immigrants an invasion. But for the most part, he's got this power. So he declares a state of emergency. I think there's 31 state of emergencies right now. So he would declare it. So if we're going to just stay specific to the wall, because it can go beyond. So there are two provisions in the law that come from I think the National Emergency Act. And so it's 22, what is it? Section 2808. So he declares a national emergency. The act allows him to scoop up funds from the defense. Now, they're called construction funds, right? So if you look at what has been spent or what's allocated, President Trump says, okay, national emergency. He doesn't have to prove it, right away, but he can go in and look at the defense and say, give me some of that money. And from a source, $10 billion from this year has not been spent on construction. That's the only money he can take. from the construction. So he can do that. But the law, the Emergencies Act, says that every 6 months, Congress has got to renew it. Well, they've never done that. They've never met. They've never requested the president to prove that these national emergencies continue, like the September, after September 11th, they have a state of emergency dealing with terrorism. They have one in Iran and banking. Congress has never exercised their power. So statutorily, the president does have the power, and it can be unlimited. He can take the military and use it as policing. So if he does that in a national emergency, he's angry about sanctuary cities. Theoretically, he can go in, and then the military can start policing. And if they arrest somebody who's a legal immigrant, they can take him away. So it is very expansive. And everything I've seen and researched is that he's got the power. It is not unconstitutional. And very rarely does the court challenge the president. You didn't see that with the travel ban. Is that your cell phone? So
there was just no, there was just something that came on my. But sometimes you leave your computer alone and an ad just starts on some website or whatever. So the thing is, Alex, from what I'm hearing, the president does have the power and really could unilaterally get twice as much money as he's asking Congress for.
Oh and there's another $13 billion that they're thinking that he might be able to use, but they're not sure. So. Okay. Yes, there's no doubt.
So, could interrupt here? Just for
Peter. And actually, I wanted to ask you, where does this go? So President Trump goes this route and goes the state of emergency route. What then, and how does that go over politically?
Again, I'll answer that, at least in my opinion. But just to back up here for a second, Alex, it was sounding almost like you're saying that there's really no limitation. The president can call whatever he wants a national emergency, a national crisis. He can divert whatever funds to whatever means or ends that he chooses. There's no limit. I mean, that's what you're making it sound like.
Yeah, Congress can overturn his actions, and they can do it. I mean, the Congress has to call a joint resolution, and 2/3, just like an overturned veto, can override him. The courts. The last time I think the courts overrode a president in national emergencies was Truman with the Youngstown sheet.
Right,
said, hey, I'm going to nationalize steel. And they're like, no, you're not. But Korematsu is a precedent. But 9/11 warrantless searches is a more recent example of and then the Trump travel ban. Right. These are examples in the Supreme Court when it comes to national security. And I think Richard Posner, who's considered like the 10th justice out of the 7th Circuit, I was listening to him in a podcast, said that there's nothing that the courts they're just not going to step up and do it. He's like, that's not really in a national emergency. He's like, it's not their role.
Well, and Alex, I think that reaches out to for our AP government students, that the courts do tend to give the president, they tend to side with the president more in these matters of national security. Like in other places, they're very prone to limit the powers of the president. But this is one area where the courts don't tend to step in.
Yeah. Yep.
So I guess we're left with the political implications. And Peter, what are your thoughts here? I mean, the president says, hey, I've got these sweeping powers and I start building this wall. I'm hearing from what it sounds like and what you're saying, Alex, it reminds me of in U.S. history, like the Wade Davis bill. It's like basically Lincoln was able to pocket veto that bill. And so to override President Trump seizing emergency powers, it would take a joint resolution of Congress. And when it comes down to it, the Senate is more a Trump Senate than what we had previously. So as far as that happening, I don't see that. So it really goes in the court of public opinion. What do you think, Peter? And then we're going to go to Brandon. That's going to be a great court of public opinion right there.
I think it's just a really great question of what does it really mean once you get past the declaration and action takes place? What does that action look like, especially here in the state of California? And how does California respond and react to those actions? I mean, are we talking in the bringing in of the Army Corps of Engineers, and then are we talking bringing in a military force to protect the Army Corps? Who's doing the construction, and Where's the material coming from? How does that actually look? Yeah. What does that look like? And then how does the state respond to it? It would be an interesting.
Yeah, it's an interesting hypothetical. Now, one thing that I want to point out here when we talk about polarization, my unscientific Twitter poll, like what I put out there a bit ago was just the statement, the congressional Democrats, let me make sure since it's a poll that I read, congressional Democrats support border security. 25% strongly agree, 28% somewhat agree, 19% somewhat disagree, and 28% strongly disagree. And so the thing is that, people who, it's like on the agrees, it seems to be about equal, but then that somewhat disagree, it's like the Republicans are very polarized in their view, like just their image of the Democratic Party is to strongly disagree, whereas it seems like, supporters of the Democratic Party seem to be more evenly split on whether Democrats support border security. Now, Brandon Burks, he's from Michigan. He was on a broadcast with me in 2016 before the election. I had some students on talking about politics. Brandon, tell us, what's your assessment of the situation? Do Democrats care about border security?
I think the Democrats are Republicans. Like Chuck Schumer said, there should be a barrier. They use the term barrier like Hillary Clinton did. Instead of saying wall, they say barrier. So, yeah, they care.
And what are your thoughts?
But it's a non-issue. I think it's just more of a distraction than anything else. Because when you look at the statistics, I got a little Southern accent. If you look at the statistics, illegal immigrants hardly commit any crime. Obama deported. Trump said in his speech that we don't have the means to send them back. Obama was known as the deporter-in-chief. Trump also said that they're taking jobs from blacks and Hispanics, but the jobs numbers came out last week, and blacks are having historically low unemployment rates. So it's just a political issue. I think it's more of a distraction than anything else. It's a non-issue.
Okay, so that, I hadn't even thought about that he's saying on one hand, they're taking jobs from blacks and Hispanics, but then he says that record low black unemployment. Yeah. And then another thing you've pointed out is President Trump had the more anecdotal evidence about the crimes committed by illegal immigrants. But you're saying that when you start to look at it, it's almost like, when there are these, these mass shootings, it's like, okay, there's a mass shooting. But then crime, like gun crime over the last 20 years is low. But then we have this anecdotal evidence. So you think something's been created.
Outliers.
The whole thing is a non-issue.
It's a non-issue. It's a distraction. So we don't pay attention to Flint doesn't have clean water, or 3,000 other cities have more toxic water. Why are we sending Israel money when we don't even have clean water here and they have free health care? We're paying for it.
Well, okay. Yeah. I mean, so the thing, and I think that's something that, just bringing somebody in, so that's not the issue that you care about. So what I'm hearing, Brandon, what I hear from you.
I used to live in Houston, Professor.
What's that?
I said, absolutely not. And I used to live in Houston, Professor.
Where do you live in Michigan, Brandon? Because I'm from Michigan too.
Just outside of Detroit, next to Dearborn, in a town called Inkster.
Oh, Inkster. Okay, I'm from Muskegon.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. So Brandon, let me ask you while you're here, what would you like to see our government do? Like, what are the priorities?
About the wall situation?
Or, well, just anything. Like, what should we be talking? I mean, because one thing that I'm seeing here is we're talking about border security and the wall and all of that. But it sounds like you've got some other things on your mind.
Nobody cares about that wall. If they spend the money on the wall, they should take it out of foreign aid. Why are we supporting other countries when our country is falling apart? There are 3,000 cities in America who don't have clean water. It's worse, more toxic than Flint. So it's a non-issue. There are less people coming here than going back from the southern border. About 40% of immigrants that stay here illegally came on an airplane.
And so that's the thing. So the porous border, when you look at all of the data together, isn't like, isn't something that is the problem. Now, one thing, and this brings us to
the infrastructure bill and put people to work that pay, jobs that pay.
Okay, and the thing is, Brandon, I think that's why a lot of people supported Trump, like working class people. They were thinking of the infrastructure, and that hasn't seemed to, that's an issue.
Ending the wars. You see, he just said he was ending 2 wars, basically. And then John Bolton said that we're not yesterday. So who is the president anyway?
I tell you, now that goes back to, and I'm going to go back to our teachers here and kind of go into this issue kind of came out of nowhere. I remember in the 1990s, Pat Buchanan made illegal immigration, the border, an issue. But at the same time, the media has such a role in dictating the policy agenda. Like what I'm hearing, bringing Brandon in here is this is about the last thing on his mind.
And nobody listens to the media anymore. You are more media than CNN. Nobody watches that. Everyone knows about the church committee. That's why people go to YouTube for their news. Nobody watches CNN. We all know that, they hired John, what's his name? Obama CIA chief. Doesn't he work for NBC?
Brennan?
Oh, yeah. What is Brennan?
Yeah, Brennan. And then you got Hayden over at CNN. It's just full of spokes. Nobody watches them. No one listens to them. It's just background noise.
Okay. All right. And what's Peter, what do you have to say to that about the role of the media?
What a question. I don't know how to answer that. Yeah. Which media? Who's media? What are we talking about here, right? The role of the media is confusing as ever.
And so, Alex, what do you see going on here as far as how this issue is framed, and what are the factors that are pushing this particular issue to the forefront when there are so many other issues that we could be talking about?
Yeah, I mean, it is. I think Brandon's right. I think there are problems. I mean, Detroit had to shut down public drinking water in their schools because it was bad. I mean, there's a lot of.
If the water in Detroit schools is poison, do you think one pipe goes to those schools, or does that mean the city of Detroit?
One of my students today, I said, well, what could we do? And the first thing said Flint. He said, fix the water. And I mean, we've talked about it. $5 billion for a wall seems justifiable for the conservative side, but it's unthinkable if we're going to think about giving it education or healthcare, right? So it's like, well, why is that problem for like a program? So it's like you could have the money, but I think it's a distraction. But it's important to Donald Trump's base, and what you've seen in 2016 is that you saw, what has happened in the last 30 years with globalization. You have seen the white working class diminished. You've seen manufacturing jobs get annihilated. And the Democrats who usually support them, you started to see them move away from white voters into minorities and other groups and more progressive. And you saw an influx of immigration. You saw immigrants being more successful than people in Appalachia, people in manufacturing jobs. We've seen this, and his base responded. They're angry, and they say, wait a minute. And I remember listening to the interview. I think Van Jones was doing it from CNN, and he interviewed somebody, and they basically said, what about us? Right? He said, people forget we've got our computers, we've got our energy being used, my lights are on. And he said, we're going about our business. They're like, well, what about us in the coal mine? So I think this is a very important issue, because what we see is like immigrants coming up, and some illegal, some not, and they're working, and it's just like, the economy was bad for a decade, and it's slowly turned around. And for President Trump's base, it is very important. But yeah, there are problems galore in this country, and right now we're focused on a wall that has no possibility of stopping all drugs, nothing. I mean, it's not going to get, when is it going to get built? I mean, he's going to spend it, what, now? It's immediately going to get built. I mean, it's going to be years of litigation. If this gets through, right, this is not going to get started in his first presidency. And if he loses, it's going to be done because it's going to go, it's going to go right into litigation.
Alex, are you suggesting the Democrats just hold the line here and don't budge on this? Is that what you're suggesting?
I mean, it would look really bad now if you're going to shut the government and just cave. I mean, you shut the government down for 3 weeks. I don't think you need a wall. I think you come out like with, Tom, you said, what the hell do they stand for? They should have come out and said, this is exactly what we want. Here's our detailed list about what we want as Democrats. I mean, it reminds me of when Democrats were trying to roll out, Obamacare, and nobody knew what the hell it was, but the Republicans were out there just hammering him, right? And it's like, hey guys, are you going to go out and you're going to go to, what is Obamacare? What is it? And they just didn't have the strong message. So if Democrats could come out and say, this is exactly what we want the $2 billion for. And if it doesn't sound good, if you don't think this is going to make us safe, then fine. Then we'll go to the $5 billion. But why?
I thought Pelosi and Schumer said that was already done today. Didn't they say that?
Mention it, but I don't know how, it's optics, right? If you got those two on stage right there, what are the optics of it? Are people listening to them, right? Or are they just like CNN clicking it off, right? So I believe, as a Democrat, myself, I believe, yes, they don't want porous borders. They want it, but they have got to hit that message home by just saying it. It's not. They have got to get behind it. They got to get in every ear, every TV, everything they can, and throw their weight behind what they want and say, we're not for porous borders. That's a stupid idea. And they got to come back as passionate as, Trump's, came out. I think he could have done a lot better job, aesthetically and be more passionate like he is on the campaign trail. But he went to the emotion, right? And so the Democrats have to go to the emotion, and they've got to be better at it and convince the people that they're not for open borders and this is the way to secure it.
Now that's go ahead, Peter.
If you're advising the president, what do you advise him?
Well, see, it's fascinating to me just to hear this, because I hear everything Alex is saying that he said tonight is kind of crystallizing, okay? Because as far as the Democratic Party goes, Hillary Clinton really wasn't able to clearly say to the American people what she was going to do. And, that really was her election a win. But, Trump had this slogan, I'm going to build a wall. I'm going to do something tangible. And the Democrats never really articulated something very clear that this is a priority for us. This is how we want to do it. But this goes back, Alex, to what you were saying about wanting to see fresh faces in the Democratic leadership.
Yeah.
Because really it's just Nancy Pelosi is now she's a great, political tactician, but she's a very poor communicator. And really just when I saw her speak, I was just like, what is, there's just nobody's going to be won over. But see, that's the other thing. Like, I'm wondering, Peter, as far as Trump and the advice he seems to be taking, the takeaway from the November midterm elections, of course, the House went to the Democrats, but, the Senate is really Trump's Senate now. Now, my senator, Lindsey Graham, has become one of, he and Trump used to butt heads all the time. But tonight, I saw Lindsey Graham was on Fox News with Sean Hannity as the president's, big like Senate cheerleader, and was really, I feel like Lindsey Graham articulates the president's message better than he does. And so the thing is, when I look at, the polls there, that, when I did the poll on Twitter, that when you saw that Republicans tend to be very much in terms of like the Democrats don't care about border security at all, it seems that perhaps Trump's endgame tonight is really to keep control, is to solidify his hold on the Republican Party. And it was really that if you look at tonight, and Alex, I think when you say that he could have been a little more passionate, if he would have been a little more passionate, he would have been better at like reaching that core audience. So for me, Peter, if I were advising him, I think that after our conversation tonight, I think the best thing for President Trump to do is not go overboard with it, not seize like the whole like 23 million or however much, he might be eligible to get, but might say that like, look, we've got, and maybe that's what he should, maybe he'll address the nation again, but to say, look, there's this money. It's emergency construction money. I'm taking this. We're opening the government back. And by the way, here's something I'm going to throw to the Democrats. I do think that President Trump at some point needs to appear that he's at least capable of being bipartisan, because that's certainly something I didn't see from either side tonight, that, there's some potential common ground here. But I think really we are at a point where, I mean, from hearing Alex, like neither side has an avenue of orderly retreat. And that's the big problem here, that, if Trump will declare a state of emergency, do this with the $5 billion, he gets the wall, the Democrats get to say like, oh, he did this around us. And they get, I think everybody might get a political victory there if you just get out of that.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree. Yeah. No path. I think he said there's no path to retreat. They've gone, this is, far enough. And I think, one of the big things was that the Republican Party was passing that piecemeal bill to keep the government open the 21st, because, the majority leader said, have this fight in February with Pelosi, not us. Right. And he didn't take that. He did not want to kick the can again to February, but that would have been a lot. I don't know how different that would have been with, the budget shutdown, starting with the House and the new Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, who is, more unpopular than Hillary Clinton and President Trump, even though she's a brilliant tactician and a very good legislator and negotiator. It's very difficult when a polarizing figure comes out. And I think that also tends to work still against Donald Trump, as being polarizing as he is.
Okay, so Peter, let me put this to you. You asked me if I were advising President Trump where to go with that. What would you say to congressional Democrats or congressional Republicans even?
Give him a win. Give him a win, but make it cost. So figure out something that will give him the win, give him what he's after, but have it charge him quite a bit for it.
And that's, yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, because when it comes down to it, I don't think, I think that Trump and his base supporters, if that wall can get built, they're willing to give just about anything. And I think, yeah, it's like, you want this win. And so you're saying just get something, make it cost to the point to where they have red meat to bring back to Ocasio-Cortez and the progressives, that, hey, we gave them the $5 billion, but look what we got back.
Yeah, you're basically some kind of grand bargain. The problem is, I don't know what that bargain would be. I would like to see the country move forward here on this issue, instead of stalemate on it. But I'm a teacher, for crying out loud, and isn't that what we do all the time? Is figure out how to move it forward.
Yeah. So that's the thing, that like there's really kind of a disconnect. I hear from what you're saying that there's a bit of a disconnect between the political class in Washington and the American people, who really, the vast majority of the American people would like to see something done in some sort of bipartisan fashion, but that's not able to work right now.
I think so. And that, and I don't even know if it's the vast majority of the American. I tend to think it's teachers, or at least it tends to be this personality here. Yeah. So let the country needs to move forward. So how are we going to do that? Well, the answer is we're going to have to compromise something out. How are we going to do that?
Yeah, and of course, Peter's teaching A-Push for the first time this year, and that's the thing. Like I mean, I think that there are a lot of arguments, a lot of credible arguments being made that we haven't seen anything like this since the 1850s. You know, where the political class like is confronted with problems and just outright refuses to reach a compromise and solve them. Now, you know, I tell you, I could keep talking to these guys all night, but it is getting kind of late here on the East Coast. Now, Alex, one of my objectives here was to let young people know about your podcast. If you'll plug that one more time and just remind people who might have come in after the beginning, you know, what the Government Gurus is about.
The Government Gurus. You can find us on Spotify. It's the Government Gurus, Apple Podcasts, and Google Play Store. It's a podcast essentially designed for the new curriculum of AP Comparative Government under College Board, and for easy access to information when you can't, you know, if you don't have your textbook and you just really want a real quick refresher on some of the material that we've covered. So we have 14 episodes. This episode will go on as a, you know, special episode. And yeah, you can find us on Twitter at the Gov Gurus and Facebook, the Government Gurus, and where else am I? Yeah, that's pretty much it. And Podomatic on the internet.
Okay, yeah, and I do mine through Podomatic as well. So great. And Peter, you know, with thanks for joining us from Southern California, Mr. Peter Picone.
It's been a pleasure. Enjoyed.
Oh, likewise. And Peter, you know, we'll have to talk sometime later as well. But good getting to talk to you face to face. So everybody, thank y'all for coming in, and hopefully y'all enjoyed the chat. You know, I've gotten aware, you know, I used to live tweet during those things, but I think that I've come to the conclusion that it's much better to talk to people face to face, and it's somewhat therapeutic. I mean, I really think that after talking to these guys, you know, and even when you're dealing with people who may come with different worldviews and political philosophies, that once you get everybody face to face, it changes things a good bit. So hopefully those of you who are still here, you know, you benefited from the discussion, and thank y'all very much. And remember, if you haven't subscribed to the Government Gurus podcast, remember to do that. And it is always a pleasure.
Thank you very much, Tom.